Hello everyone, I'm Francisco Javier, and welcome back to The Last Cangasero. Today we dive into a story so chilling, so full of suspense and courage, that it has been nearly forgotten by time. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because this story is one you won't want to forget. It was the year 1897, in a remote, wind-swept ranch deep in the American Southwest. The kind of place where the sun scorched the earth by day and the darkness at night seemed to hide secrets older than anyone living. Life here was hard, unforgiving, and often brutal. Men came and went, families struggled, and superstition intertwined with daily survival. It was in this world that a young worker found himself at the mercy of forces he could not fully understand, caught between fear and hope, desperation and the faintest whisper of faith. He was a young man, barely more than a boy, who had traveled hundreds of miles seeking work. His family's faces, their worn smiles and quiet prayers, haunted him even as he toiled under the blistering sun. On this day something went terribly wrong. Chains, cold, heavy, unyielding, had been brought out, intended to punish, to break, to make an example. And the young man, trembling, voice cracking, shouted a plea that would echo across the plains for over a century. "Please, sir, don't let the devil light that fire." Think about that for a moment. Imagine your entire world, all you've ever known, suddenly reduced to a moment like this. The fear, the heat, the helplessness. What if your whole life was a closed book and all people ever saw was the cover? That was the reality he faced. Every fiber of his being screamed for mercy, but the eyes of the rancher, the man in charge, were cold and steady, watching, calculating, waiting. The rancher was a man of paradox. Known for his strictness, for a sense of justice that could cut like a whip, yet also capable of compassion that few would expect. His hands bore the calluses of decades spent shaping land, cattle, and men. His eyes had seen cruelty but also courage. And in that split second, when the young man's cries pierced the air, something shifted. Instead of fueling the fire, instead of following the expectations of superstition and brutality, the rancher acted. He did more than simply spare the young man. He picked up the chains, those instruments of oppression and terror, and he set them ablaze. Flames licked the night air, sparks flying into the wind, and the sound of burning metal echoed across the silent ranch. For those who witnessed it, the moment was surreal. Flames danced in the darkness, illuminating faces frozen in disbelief. Some whispered about the devil, some about divine intervention, and others simply couldn't comprehend what had just occurred. But the young worker, the one who had begged for mercy, felt something even deeper than relief. Something that would linger for the rest of his life. It was not just freedom from physical chains, it was the affirmation that courage, hope, and a single act of defiance could change the course of a life. Hidden in the shadows of history are countless forgotten rituals, strange superstitions, and acts of cruelty that defined life on these 19th-century ranches. The burning of those chains was more than just rebellion, it was a confrontation with the darkness that haunted every corner of this unforgiving world. The rancher's decision defied not only superstition but also the societal expectations of punishment. What compelled him to act? Was it empathy, a moral code, or something deeper, something almost spiritual? This story, long buried in dusty records and whispered memories, reveals the complexity of life in that era. It speaks to the human struggle for freedom, the quiet courage that rises when hope seems lost, and the profound impact one individual can have when they choose to act differently than expected. How many times in life do we stand at a crossroads, unsure whether to act, to speak, to step into the unknown? Have you ever said goodbye to something that once carried your dreams, only to discover that the choice you feared most became the one that saved you? The young man's eyes reflected both terror and wonder as he watched the chains dissolve into smoke. Each crackle of the fire seemed to whisper secrets of the past, memories of others who had suffered in silence, and the possibility that courage could be contagious. That night, the wind carried more than just the smell of scorched metal. It carried a message that would transcend time. Even in a world filled with darkness, even when surrounded by cruelty and fear, acts of bravery and defiance could ignite hope in ways no one could have imagined. And so, in the heart of the desert, under a sky littered with stars, a young man's desperate cry became a catalyst for change. The rancher, the fire, the chains, they were more than symbols. They were a story of humanity, of confrontation with the unknown, of the extraordinary choices we sometimes make when faced with impossible situations. As the smoke drifted into the night, the rancher's gaze lingered on the boy, and the world seemed to pause, if only for a moment, to witness something almost sacred. The morning after the fire, the ranch seemed almost unchanged. The sun rose over the rugged horizon, painting the desert in muted golds and deep shadows, Yet the events of the previous night had left an invisible mark on everyone present. The young worker, still trembling from his ordeal, couldn't shake the image of the burning chains, the way the metal hissed and twisted, how the flames seemed to consume not just iron, but the weight of fear itself. He wandered the yard, his mind a storm of relief, awe, and lingering dread. The rancher, meanwhile, returned to his routines as if nothing had happened. Yet those who watched him closely could see the subtle changes, the way his shoulders carried a weight lighter than before, as if a private understanding had shifted something deep within him. He had confronted the unspoken darkness, and in doing so, had rewritten the rules of that isolated world. Some whispered that the man had always been fair, but this act went beyond fairness. It was an assertion of something almost mystical, a moral defiance that would ripple through the ranch long after the fire was gone. Life on the ranch remained harsh. Sun-baked days demanded back-breaking work, nights carried the chill of the desert, and superstition still clung like dust in the wind. Yet, a subtle change began to take root. Workers who had once trembled at the mere mention of punishment now exchanged glances that held more curiosity than fear. The young man in particular felt an unspoken kinship with the rancher, a bond forged in fire and bravery. What if every choice we make, every act of courage or defiance, quietly shapes the world around us in ways we will never fully understand? There were rumors that circulated among neighboring ranches, stories of chains mysteriously burning without explanation, of men who stood against cruelty and survived. The young worker could not tell whether these were mere coincidences or echoes of something more profound, a hidden pattern woven into the fabric of this rugged land. Each day he became more attuned to the subtle rhythms of the ranch, noticing how fear and superstition shaped behavior, how courage could alter perception, and how seemingly small acts could carry consequences far beyond the moment. As the weeks passed, he found himself drawn into the rancher's routines, learning not only the practical skills required to survive in such a harsh environment but also the unspoken codes of honor and respect that governed life here. He began to understand the complexity of human nature, the interplay of power, fear, and morality. How often do we encounter moments where the moral choice is hidden beneath layers of expectation and tradition? And yet, sometimes, a single decision, like the burning of chains, can illuminate paths that were previously invisible. The rancher's past, though never spoken aloud, began to reveal itself in subtle ways. There were hints of lost family, letters hidden in drawers, and the way he would pause when old scars on his hands caught the sunlight. These traces suggested a man who had faced suffering and injustice long before the young worker arrived. Perhaps it was this history that informed his decisive act the night of the fire, a personal understanding of oppression that compelled him to act in defiance of cruelty. The young man began to realize that courage often requires empathy, an ability to connect with pain not one's own, and a willingness to challenge the expectations of society. Yet, despite these lessons, the shadow of superstition lingered. Local legends spoke of spirits that haunted the desert, of fires ignited by forces beyond comprehension, of punishments that carried curses long after the physical pain was gone. At night, when the wind howled across the plains, the young man would sometimes hear strange sounds, whispers, laughter, or perhaps the sighs of past victims. The rancher never spoke of these things, but his gaze would sometimes drift to the horizon, as if acknowledging an unseen presence, a reminder that the past was never truly gone, and that courage must coexist with vigilance. The young worker began keeping a private journal, recording events, observations, and thoughts. He wrote about the fire, the chains, and the unspoken bond he felt with the rancher. He wrote about fear, wonder, and the profound lesson that a single act of defiance could change lives in ways no one might ever witness. What if our choices, like these burned chains, are signals to the world, invisible markers of hope that ripple far beyond our immediate understanding? These reflections became a source of comfort, a way to navigate the complex moral landscape of the ranch. Slowly, a subtle transformation occurred. The rancher, the young worker, and even the other laborers began to understand that fear alone was not a tool of order, but a cage. Freedom, courage, and respect were more powerful than threats or superstition. The fire had symbolically destroyed the chains, but its true impact was in the hearts of those who witnessed it. The young man felt a stirring of purpose, a realization that bravery was not merely about surviving, but about making choices that reverberate with integrity and humanity. And yet, for all this change, questions remained. Who had placed the chains there in the first place? What dark traditions lingered unseen in the corners of the ranch? Were there others who might suffer under similar threats, and could the lessons of that fire be carried forward to protect them? As the young man wrestled with these questions, He understood that the story of the chains, the fire, and the rancher was far from complete. It was a living narrative, one that demanded courage, reflection, and a willingness to confront the shadows that history often conceals. As the months passed, the ranch settled into a rhythm, yet the memory of that night, the fire, the chains, the desperate cry, never faded. The young worker grew stronger, wiser, more attuned to the delicate balance between fear, courage, and moral choice. Every glance at the scorched ground where the chains had burned reminded him that even the smallest act of defiance could ignite something much larger: hope. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged horizon, painting the desert in molten gold, the rancher summoned him to the old wooden barn. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of smoke from the previous fires. There, amid shadows that flickered with the dying light, the rancher revealed something long kept secret. Hidden beneath loose boards he had stored letters, journals, and artifacts detailing a dark past, abuse, betrayal, and a chain of injustices that had haunted him since youth. It became clear why he had chosen to burn the chains that night. He recognized in the young worker's fear a reflection of his own suffering, a chance to break the cycle. The revelation stunned the young man. This rancher, a figure of stern authority, was not merely a disciplinarian or an enforcer. He was a man shaped by his own trials, carrying scars that the world had refused to notice. And yet, he had chosen empathy over cruelty, courage over tradition. The young worker realized that true bravery was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act rightly in spite of it. He thought about his own life, the journeys he had taken, the dangers he had faced, and the moments where courage had been his only guide. In the nights that followed, whispers of the rancher's secret spread subtly among the other laborers. Some treated it as legend, others as cautionary tale. But to the young worker, it became a personal blueprint for life. He understood that freedom was never merely physical. It resided in the mind, in the choices we make, in the willingness to defy expectation when justice calls for it. What if the fire had never been lit? What if the chains had remained? He shuddered at the thought. That one decision, that one act of courage had altered destinies. Years passed. The young worker grew into a man, respected among the ranchers and laborers alike. Yet, every now and then he would return to the site of the burned chains. There, beneath the desert stars, he would close his eyes and remember the fear, the pleading voice, the extraordinary act of the rancher. And in those quiet moments, he often pondered questions that had no easy answers. How many of us have the chance to change someone's life with a single decision? And how often do we let fear dictate our actions instead? The rancher, older now, walked with the slow certainty of a life fully lived. He would smile at the young man, no longer a boy, and in his eyes lingered the knowledge that courage and empathy could leave marks more enduring than fear ever could. The desert winds carried stories, and in their rustle, there was almost a voice, as if the land itself acknowledged the act of defiance that had broken the chains. The young man often reflected on this. That moment of fire was more than an escape. It was a challenge, a lesson, and an enduring testament to the power of human choice. And then, one fateful day, a traveling official arrived with a task that would test everything the young man had learned. He was asked to oversee the punishment of another worker, one bound by chains similar to those he had once feared. The air was thick with tension, the shadows of superstition looming larger than ever. The young man's heart raced. Could he repeat the courage of the past? Could he act in a way that defied cruelty and fear, and yet commanded respect? He recalled the rancher's unwavering gaze, the fire, the crackle of burning chains, and the quiet affirmation that integrity mattered more than tradition. In a deliberate, calm motion, he stepped forward and released the chains. Sparks flew into the dry desert wind, echoing the night years ago. Those watching gasped, unsure whether to admire or fear him. But in that moment he understood the truth that had taken years to grasp. Bravery is contagious, defiance can be moral, and a single act of courage can ripple far beyond the individual. The worker whose chains had burned looked at him with wide eyes, a mixture of fear and awe, and for the first time felt what freedom truly meant. And so, in the arid, unforgiving heart of the American Southwest, the story of the fire, the chains, and the rancher reached its zenith. The young man, now a guardian of courage, had a choice to make, a choice that could either perpetuate fear or ignite hope. The lesson was clear. History does not merely record events, it remembers decisions. And in the quiet hum of the desert night, the fire's glow lingered, not in smoke, not in metal, but in the courage that refuses to be extinguished. Because sometimes, what got left behind is exactly what could have changed everything. Before you leave, Make sure to subscribe to The Last Kangasero and explore 2 more videos uncovering hidden stories of courage, defiance, and the secrets history almost forgot.